Hello and welcome to another 6 Seconds Live. I'm Gwyneth Jones and I am joined here today by Mirella Crede, who is a conflict resolution specialist and also works a lot with emotional intelligence. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, 6 Seconds is the Emotional Intelligence Network. We are all around the world, but we are 6 Seconds Europe. And so we are talking to a lot of people based here in Europe who use emotions and emotional intelligence in their work in some way. And so our topic this year really has been around empathy. And in particular, we've been talking quite recently about how we can use empathy as part of our emotional intelligence toolkit. So Mirella, hi.
Hi. Thanks
I
for
will.
inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. So do you want to just start by saying a little bit more about who you are and all of the things that you do?
Sure. I am Mirella and I work mostly as conflict resolution professional, as a mediator. I train when it comes to communication, nonviolent communication, also everything that has to do how you deal with emotions, how emotions play a role in our communication, in our conflicts, and in all other areas of our lives. So I originally worked in a big company. I studied international business, so I also know that in the workplace, also there, it can be quite tricky to deal with your emotions, and especially you're negotiating a lot. So I try to also train towards the empathetic negotiation model, where you really do not just look on the, let's say, the points of interest, but also the underlying interests of each party, of each person, and to do it in a way that also the people negotiating can also look out of their own zone into the zone of the others in a less how do you say fact-based way, but it also in an emotionally based way. Yeah.
So maybe can you tell me a little bit more about how did you get into this work? So when was it that you kind of thought, mediation is the thing I'd like to pursue?
Well, funnily enough, I originally studied international business, as I said, and then I started working in a big organization, and I started working in marketing and sales. I continued as an expatriate abroad, and then I came back. I did leadership or management consulting. I moderated loads of workshops, strategy workshops. I did customer management, relationship management, and everything in these all these topics, communication plays a major role. And all the time when communication plays a role, it's also about understanding, being understood, making yourself understood. Also in marketing, making your product understood, making your company understood, and having this kind of target group orientation where you have to, like I always tend to say, the worm should not be tasty to the fisherman, but to the fish if you want to catch it. So just to always try to kind of also see the other side, and do it in a recipient oriented way, how you communicate, and also see that everything you do affects the other. And so eventually I went into studying on top organizational psychology, business psychology. And one part of that actually was psychological dialogue and mediation and coaching. And there I actually felt, when I heard about mediation, when I was trained as a mediator, I was like, well, this is actually what I do a lot of the times in my daily business, unconsciously or unintentionally, or even informally. And this is actually a profession, and this is actually something I automatically do, I intuitively do. And also there, when it comes to intuition and gut feelings, heuristics, and so on, I really felt that there is something that comes naturally to me. And then so I pursued that, and it felt just like a calling, and it felt like the most natural thing to do. And so I decided to make that my profession. And I also wanted to help people to feel better in the sense of communicating better, feeling understood better, and then saving energy that is often wasted on these conflictual dialogues, which might not need to happen if actually there was somebody who could help them understand each other better and resolve it in a better way, and then actually focus on the goal, what you want to achieve together, instead of circling like around in your pot of soup.
So empathy is the keyword at the moment. So maybe I can ask you, what does empathy actually mean for you? And then how does it come in to conflict resolution?
A lot of the times, when we hear empathy is like kind of being like understanding the others, but empathy is like really not just seeing the other side and their hearing their perspectives, but even feeling or like being able to understand what might also be going on there underlying, like to make a step towards the other person, but in an empathetic way, also understand where they are coming from emotionally, why they are feeling in a certain way, why the behaviors that they are showing that are obvious might have an influence that is not so visible, how kind of how you perceive them, but then also not just the outer perception, but also trying to dig deeper and see the motivators, see maybe also the barriers, and really try to kind of feel the others. So this is a bit, to me, like you have from The Little Prince, where you say like try to see with your heart and not just with your eyes. And if you are trying to see with your heart, and if you are able to see with your heart, this to me is how I describe for myself empathy.
Yeah, you've mentioned intuition a couple of times as well. And so I think that can be a concept that is a little hard to sell, maybe, right, to corporations or businesses. So we at 6 Seconds, we say emotions are data. We kind of talk also about brain styles, how some people, they focus on the emotional information they're receiving versus the kind of data-based factual information. Yeah, so how would you describe intuition to somebody who isn't sure what, can it be taught, do you think?
Well, to me, I go away from intuition as the spiritual angle, but it is kind of, it comes from the same, like when you study actually behavioral economics. We used to come from economics in only being numbers and or like predicting on scientifically, let's say, based outcomes of what people buy and so on and so on. However, behavioral economics is also, when you look at financial markets and so on, how people actually act and behave, and you can predict certain behaviors. So also there, in a way, intuition plays a role when you look at it from the angle of heuristics, of bias, in a sense. It is in a way a shortcut that our brain takes. You can see it in sports, somebody who in baseball, for example, like how to, when the ball comes, your retina sees it, sends the signal to your to your thalamus, and then a reaction needs to come, and it can either be, let's say, triggered by amygdala, let's say a very strong emotional reaction, but it can also be a heuristic that you're creating synapses where your brain simply makes shortcuts. And immediately after you did that a couple of times, there's no big logical thinking mechanism working in your brain how to catch the ball. You simply predict the angle, how the ball will come. And this is kind of, and we have this in a way where it's helpful. And it can also be helpful in different other behaviors from experience. So intuition is a lot driven by experience, how our brain has made up roads, and how we basically come, without thinking about it again and again, to shortcuts. They can be misleading from time to time, so they should not always be taken as a standalone in at each occasion, but they play a role in how to quickly and even well react to a situation. Take an intuition in the sense of predicting that the car in front of you is going to break. So the reaction time of yourself. Also this, I mean, when we speak about intuition and how to feel other people, it is in a way also learned behavior. And also empathy. I mean, there are people who are, let's say, there's this illiteracy emotionally, yeah. So there are people who are just like are not really able or never learned it. But if you grew up in a way where you kind of were trained on how to read emotions, how to read faces, how to predict actions based on, or reactions based on your actions. This is also in a way intuition that is being formed. Your brain creates shortcuts and can more quickly then see, okay, this person is now looking at me in a certain way. They might be angry. and be careful, because they might not be, and they just look that way. Happened to me when I'm concentrated. I look like I want to kill someone. But it can be helpful in sensing. So intuition is also something that is not necessarily, should not be just shoved away, but should be something that's taken into consideration as a valid shortcut sometimes.
Yeah, I love that you're kind of breaking that down into a more, let's say, scientifically palatable methodology. And it makes me think of a book I read called How We Decide. And they're saying often, the intuition of experts, it's really unconscious, unconscious processing, right? Our brain is doing the maths for us. We're not aware of the process. We just get the final result at the end. And Catherine there, I saw, was asking,
I would just
what would the mathematical equation be for intuition, I wonder? I'm not. There's a suggestion.
It's a great question. It's a great question, because I actually in my psychology studies, there was one actually module which is called behavioral economics. So actually there are equations, and I can look them up, and maybe we can post something about that later. But it's in that case a super interesting question. How would that look? And also what you said before about the unconscious. I mean, I'm not native English, so but I would say there is a difference between unconscious and subconscious. So some things just happen in a way that is not so obviously conscious to us. We are not aware, but they are still in a way conscious. They're not just kind of happening by pure chance. So we're just not necessarily completely aware of that.
Yeah. I like that. And of course, it is largely subconscious, isn't it? If you see somebody's face, you will have a feeling for what is the emotion you're perceiving here. We're not going to kind of break down the exact angles of the eyes and analyze it mathematically to decide that it's anger. That's all happening maybe subconsciously. But going into empathy again, and how that's used in conflict resolution. I'm curious about, are you able to help the people that you're mediating for to access their empathy? Is there a way to kind of lead people to be more aware of what's happening?
Yeah, definitely. It always depends. It depends on the kind of mediation, on the people you are mediating who are in conflict and or in dispute. If it should be a more contractual, or if it's a transformative, where you really want to repair a relationship, or in which stage the people are in, how receptive they are, how much has happened in the past. So it always depends on the state of the people themselves. And what I experienced is that, like in one case, for example, you could see how one person, like it was a couple, and one person really wanted to hold it together and wanted to be strong, and wanted to look at the facts. And it was actually about family, about children, and the other person also was in a way already quite seemed very cold. And there was a situation when then eventually one party started crying, and the other party was just like not reacting to it. And in my case, like this is just one example of many, I approached that by asking, okay, I see your partner is crying. you see that as well. How does that make you feel? And then you can also see that how the other person, the other party can soften, and you try to, in a way, translate why the other party now is crying. Because what is sometimes misunderstood is that just the behavior that you observe, or the emotion that you observe, is not necessarily the emotion that is actually felt in the core. So if you are crying, or if you are lashing out, or if you are, then this is just, that's basically, it's your body's response of maybe overwhelm or of a deeper cause. So if you're being crying, this can be because you're sad, because you're disappointed, because you feel helpless, because you are really angry. And if you are lashing out, that can be because actually this is you show anger, but what you actually feel is hurt. So what I'm trying is then to help explain, for example, the observed emotion, and in a deeper way, to ask the party who is crying, in that case, why are you crying? And showing the other, okay, you see your partner is crying, how does it make you feel? Of course, then there are people who don't care this happens, so you can't save them all. But often this is also then again, or I observe that a lot, a mechanism that is also protection, so that the other party is already, I don't know, just closed down, or doesn't want to show their own fragility or vulnerability, or doesn't even want to give in, or thinks it's a manipulation, because this can also be, emotions can be actually very manipulative. If you have a partner that always cries, to make you feel guilty, then the moment that they actually cry because they want to express something, the other one is not sensitive anymore to it. So basically what I do is helping to translate these emotions, to try to also show the other party that it does not necessarily have to do with them why this person is now angry, but that it actually mostly has to do with the person themselves and something that's going on inside them. And often when that happens, the other party becomes softer and maybe even more understanding. And yeah, so this is one example of many, how being a mediator who deals with emotions and empathy can help solving a blockage, or making people understand each other better.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And there was a comment just there from Maria about receptiveness as well. I don't know how the word receptiveness would land with you, because I think sometimes people conflate it with being passive, but it's maybe not the same, right? It's just being open to what is there.
Well, I mean, we are all different, and that's often we all come with our package, and I tend to repeat that because we all have reasons, and that's that often, or what you also can experience is now that emotions or breakouts or whichever way, they are not taken seriously, or they're not being acknowledged, or it's not so important. And just to acknowledge, and that often is a big step towards, or can be a big step towards resolution, that there is not an overreaction, or it might then at the end be seen as, yeah, I overreacted. However, the reaction had a cause, and the cause has a reason, and this reason needs to be respected and seen. And it's like a ghost, and it won't go away until you say, hi, yeah, ghost, I see you, go away. So it will come back, or it will feel neglected. And so an emotion, whichever way it shows, needs to, or should be acknowledged for what it is, and then from there go into the evaluation, and basically the let's say exploration of the root cause. And being receptive. You have people who either, for reasons that have to do with the conflict itself, with the relationship, how it has been, with patterns, but also with trauma, or with or reasons that are basically in society, in culture, in how they have been brought up, how they, like the workplace they are in, the surroundings, why they might not be receptive or not want to be receptive, why they might shut down, or like not acknowledge the importance. So there are several factors, and my job in that is when people are not able to do that step by themselves, to help them look at all these things and try to get the time, especially in a transformational mediation and conflict resolution where you really want to improve the relationship mostly, to really take enough time to explore. And to explore not just like what you showed in the post before, the conflict iceberg. I take it even like you have in the iceberg on the surface emotions that you see, as I said before, the observable, the ones that are being observed. But then there's so much underlying, and it can actually go back, like just one lashing out can go back decades of your journey, So you need to find the trigger points, and then it can actually take loads of time, and it can be even accompanied in bigger cases by a psychology, but or by a psychologist parallel, but it can resolve the conflict, and the more the other person learns maybe also how to read the reactions in a deeper way.
I'm glad you referenced the conflict iceberg there, because I think it's a really helpful. It's not ours, right? It's quite common in mediation just to imagine what is below the surface, right? Because there's so much going on below the surface. And I wanted to ask about you, because of course you come into a mediation and you are also a person with your own emotions and thoughts and under the ocean part of the iceberg. So how is it for you? How do you kind of bring in your own emotional intelligence into the situation?
There are different angles how to look at that, actually, because it can be that like I'm also just a person and a human being, so I experience all these things too. The only advantage that I maybe have is that I immediately kind of then try to reflect, and I go like so I work maybe I can more quickly take a step back and observe myself and the others, which then helps maybe trying to do better next time. But I come with a lot of compassion if I go into a mediation, if I go into a conflict that has nothing to do with me. Of course, then there are moments, and I had, for example, a very dramatic and highly escalated mediation that went on for a long time, which I actually in that extreme hadn't experienced yet, which was really it was wearing me down. I really felt it was like really affecting me emotionally. It even affected my private life in some ways, because you cannot just like strip it off when you go out. And I was actually very happy because it was a co-mediation, and I had a very good colleague. We clicked very well professionally in that sense. So, and he also hasn't experienced exactly the same thing. However, we could like help each other to maybe like either if it went wrong, not doubt ourselves, or also when it touched you emotionally, that you come to the point. That was my learning, to like that, just feeling like empathy doesn't mean suffering for yourself. So you can be empathetic, but you don't need to suffer in the same way, because then you're not helpful. So you have to feel a certain distance and to leave the responsibility with the parties, to leave the conflict with the parties, that you're there to help, but don't make it yours. And this is hard sometimes, but it's possible. But it is like kind of, but you also have to find it's a fine line that you are not becoming like numb in a way. So you have to still be open yourself, but you have to also, you shouldn't create a wall, but you should just be aware that it can touch your heart, but it should not make you suffer in the same way. So, because then you're not helpful. And so that's when you need for yourself certain mechanisms that shouldn't be coping mechanisms, but should be a healthy, how do you call that? Like finding a healthy balance, but also finding a healthy boundary. That was the word, that you find a healthy boundary especially when you're sensitive, that you kind of shield yourself to a certain degree without becoming numb.
I think, you're hitting on a very important thing in the topic of empathy, right? Because some people will say empathy is feeling with another person, but at the same time, if you're feeling exactly what they're feeling, then you're going to end up needing to be comforted and helped as well. So I like you're talking about finding the fine line between numbness and being cold and sort of disconnected, and feeling so much that now you're suffering and you can't help. And I know some people use different terms. They say compassion, sympathy, empathy, but
yeah, wanted to say that
do you have
too.
any coping mechanisms, if we do use that word, that you use to help keep that healthy boundary?
In a way, well, one is that you basically just that you trust yourself, that you trust that you tried your best in what you did, that you learned to do that, and what you just mentioned, maybe just quickly going back to that, and then I'll come back to the coping. What you just said was a very important point, and I actually read about that a while ago, and that is like empathy versus compassion. It is important to have compassion, and if you're a very compassionate person, that can eat you up, because I actually read about this in this now context of large scale conflict like war, that you actually that there are people experiencing compassion fatigue. Yeah, so this is then eventually, and then you're shutting down, and this is that you, if you're too compassionate, you are eventually getting tired of being so compassionate, especially when you feel helpless, that you can't help, that you can't do enough, or so eventually you're shutting down as a protection mechanism, which is also counterproductive. So what I learned sometimes, or what one of my coping mechanisms is if you want to call it that, or to try, especially in high, and because we're now talking a lot of highly emotional situations, and I would like to come back later to also conflicts where emotions play a role, but it's not like highly escalated like that, but if it's like highly escalated, where you try to kind of act a little counterintuitive, saying, when coming back to intuition, that intuitively I would be very compassionate in my perception, and trying to take yourself a step back, trying to monitor yourself, trying to in the process feel a little less, but still enough to be empathetic and to try to understand, and also afterwards to have a way how to, of course, in mediation it's all sensitive data, but I mean, you can at least talk about how it made you feel. Talk to someone. That's why I said, like with my colleague in this really extremely high escalated family dispute, there was so much hurt, there was so much hate, there was so much pain, there was so much like guilt and so on, that you have somebody who can help you. And we called it, when we had like our talks about it, we called it emotional cleansing, where you actually deal with the things that you experience with the help of someone, talking about it, just kind of sorting it in your head, trying to find a way how to maybe constructively help, but you need to cleanse yourself, and whichever way works. For some it helps just to go for a walk, it helps to meditate, it can help to go to a psychologist yourself if it's very emotionally loaded and you can't deal with it, because it feels like your own triggers are being touched all the time. As I said, you're also a human, yeah. So it can also be that you're being triggered all of the time. So what you're doing is actually you're practicing self-control. And this is another topic which we experience often in either conflicts or just in people acting, that again, it is biological. It is the brain that creates reactions and emotions. And we have in our brain the amygdala, which is like the big emotional like queen, let's say, or king, and basically the fight, flight, and freeze response. is a something where you feel that you see something, your sensors are getting or hear something, so you get a sensor, and it can already be sent as a signal to your thalamus, and then it kind of needs to it works, and it sends some signal to the amygdala, and the amygdala goes like wow and shoots, and actually activates your emotional responses, the emotional center, which can be nice. However, it can sometimes be so fast that you already react. That's, for example, maybe lashing out, until it takes a while until the rest of your cognitive centers, actually understand what's going on, so you're basically acting in that's maybe being then choleric, or being, I don't know.
Well, we talk about this as the amygdala
crying,
hijack, right? So it can come out in a lot of different ways. And yeah, I think a lot of what you're talking about here comes into the emotional intelligence realm, right? Like recognize your own patterns, work out what is it that you need to help you balance your emotions. And then the final piece that maybe I didn't say was self-empathy, right? So having empathy for yourself as well. So we're coming to the end of our time now. So I just want to ask you, is there one kind of final summary that you'd like to share? So if someone's just tuned in at the very end now and they want to just ask maybe, how can I be more empathic when there are conflicts? What would be the take-home message?
Abdullah just left a nice comment, which is like, be careful of false alarms. And we're stretching the time, and it is a topic you can talk forever about. And I'm actually grateful for that, but because it means a lifetime of happiness in my job. However, this is one thing which I just put in there, is like, know yourself and sincerely try to understand the others. Explore your own journey, and try to be curious, and sincerely curious, not just as I have to do it, check, of the others. And if you are not, fine, because it's not inside you, then have others that maybe see that and are patient with you, that you might not be so empathetic, that you've not learned it, that you've that is not so important to you, maybe, but then have other people who are actually tolerant and patient, and able to then take the emotion and be able to put it into a good verbal explication for the more cognitive and less emotionally sensitive people to understand where it is coming from, and articulate it. So learn to control your emotions in a good manner, but not suppress them. And try to kind of find a way how to articulate them in a non-violent way, how to suppress the false alarms in a way that, okay, I see you. No, I don't need you right now. I can do it differently. But always understand that they play a role, that emotions are there, no matter where. Home, friends, workplace, politics, anywhere, and emotions are not just crying or being angry. Emotions are passion. Emotions are, just there are so many different emotions that are not on our top list of what we would call an emotion or feeling, but they matter as well, and they are always part of it, and they should be acknowledged in the process.
Definitely. Well, you're echoing a lot of the stuff that we talk about here at 6 Seconds, and I'm happy about that. That emotions are, very valuable data, right? And there's no use in ignoring them, because then we're not seeing the full picture at all. And yeah, so thank you so much for joining us today, Mirela, and thank you to everyone who's been watching and leaving comments. And yeah, you can watch the replay of this on our YouTube channel or on our LinkedIn, which is 6 Seconds Europe. And we'll be here again in another month with another LinkedIn Live. Where we'll be talking about, again, peace building and emotional intelligence. And also, if you join us in 2 weeks, we will have a free workshop about empathy where you can drop in. So you can join too, Mirela, if you like.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right. So thank you so much, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you for joining and thanks for having me. It was wonderful. Bye.